Traceability is a very general concept that can be applied across the entire design cycle, but let's give some concrete examples. The first one is design traceability. So design traceability might be a requirement that traces to a design, that traces to an implementation, or it might be a requirement that traces to a test. Here's an example figure showing a requirements to state chart traceability spreadsheet. The various rows are different states and different transitions within a state chart, and the columns are different requirements. And the point of this is that there's an X where a particular state traces to a particular requirement. For example, state 2.3 vend on the third row of data traces to requirement 2.1 and 2.4a and 2.4b. While it's possible to get fancy and do things like say, hey, there's a high or medium or a low traceability, in practice, usually it's enough to just put an X where you think it mostly traces and leave blank where it doesn't. This is not supposed to be a high precision instrument, but what it does do is if you see a table like this and there's a completely empty column, it means nothing is there contributing to that requirement. And if there's a completely empty row, that means that that row is there, but there's no requirement causing it to be there. So an empty row or an empty column, either one tells you you have some sort of traceability problem that you should pay more attention to. Another type of traceability example is software quality assurance traceability, and this has to do with confirming a process is being carried out. For SQA traceability, every process step, so every box in the V, should be producing some sort of document or artifact. That document and artifact, represented by the arrows in the V, is a piece of information that's transferred to the next step. If you can't find that document or artifact, then you have to ask whether the step really happened. And ideally, you have some sort of quality metric on whether or not that design and artifact were done according to reasonable quality standards. Another type of traceability example is safety analysis. Safety analysis is covered much more extensively in other lectures, but one of the simple examples is you have a hazard, and that hazard results in a safety requirement, and that safety requirement results in a necessary mitigation, and then you want to validate that the hazard is actually mitigated. If you break a step in that chain, then you're not sure the hazard's been mitigated. Traceability through that chain lets you know that you've successfully validated that you've mitigated all the hazards identified. A last example is defect traceability. You actually want to ensure that all the bugs that are important get fixed. And that traceability chain looks like there's a bug report, to a defect that's been identified, to a task to fix the bug, and code check-in from the result of the bug fix, and a regression test to make sure that sure enough the bug was actually fixed. With all these examples, there are two types of traceability. One traceability is left to right across the arrows. That's verification. And the last type of traceability is taking a look at the end, for example, regression test and the bug fix, and going backwards and say, hey, did that actually fix the bug report? And that would be validation.